The winter train cut through the icy silence of the Chicago suburbs, its whistle echoing across frosted cornfields and quiet streets. It was a night wrapped in cold, sharp, and wide, as the worn steel carriage rattled down the frozen tracks. Inside, the dim glow of flickering lights barely reached through the fogged-up windows. The air felt brittle, touched with drafts that crept through every unnoticed crack. In the middle of the car, a man sat quietly, a blanket stretched around himself and his sleeping daughter. Daniel Carter, 30 years old, rugged from years of working railroad maintenance, cradled his 7-year-old daughter, Emma, like she was made of porcelain. He held her close, shielding her tiny frame from the chill with his own warmth. His fingers, calloused from tightening bolts and replacing steel joints, moved gently now, adjusting the corners of the blanket so that cold air couldn't reach her cheeks. Emma breathed in little sighs of trust and rhythm, her face buried into his jacket. Her presence was soft, sleeping easily against a chest she knew to be home. Others in the carriage glanced their way, always just once, moved by something unspoken. But the woman sitting right next to Daniel felt the cold more acutely than anyone else that night. Olivia Bennett, 29, a name that graced luxury labels and glossy magazines, sat with her arms buried in her coat sleeves. The coat, sleek and dramatic, tailored in Paris, had never failed a red carpet event, but here it failed her miserably. Her hands trembled, her breath released in thin clouds she tried not to draw attention to. Wind snuck past her collar and circled her spine like a whisper with sharp teeth. She looked at Daniel, hesitating. Then, her voice hardly more than a breath, she whispered, "Can I slip under your blanket?" The question felt like a betrayal of the image she'd carefully built for nearly a decade, the image of a woman who never asked for help. But tonight, Olivia wasn't adorned with power or poise, just fatigue, just cold. Daniel turned his head slowly. He blinked once. Her voice hadn't been loud, but it had felt louder in the middle of this quiet car. He looked at her, really looked, and instinct moved before reason. Pale cheeks, chattering teeth, the stiffness in her shoulders trying to hide the trembling in her bones. He'd seen hypothermia before in his line of work, and it didn't care about titles. For a moment, nothing happened. The train continued its slow song against the tracks. Emma curled tighter against her father, unaware. Olivia's words hung in the space between them like a tiny thread stretched across a canyon. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't need to. He loosened the blanket ever so slightly, careful not to disturb Emma, and leaned aside to make room. Olivia hesitated only a second before scooting in. The warmth was minimal, and yet it felt seismic, not just in temperature, but in what it cost both of them to share it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracked, soft, and disarmed. He nodded once, said nothing more. Daniel turned his attention back to Emma, whose tiny fingers curled unconsciously into his jacket. She had been through more than a child should, yet she never let it slow her down. Not outwardly. But he knew her silence when it crept in, knew when her breaths grew shallow, or when her eyes darted toward nothing in search of something missing. She missed her mother. He knew this. He always knew. 7 years ago, pneumonia took his wife in just one cruel winter. No goodbye, no time. Since then, Daniel had shaped every inch of his life around the small girl in his arms now. From shift work in frigid dawns to late-night school project disasters, she was the axis of his everyday. Never missed a doctor's appointment. Never failed to check the thermostat 3 times at night. Every scarf wrapped around her, every extra sock packed in her school bag, rituals of devotion. The man who barely afforded his rent had learned to stretch both dollars and love. Their apartment near the train yard thundered every time a freight passed. But to Emma, the vibration meant Daddy was near. Olivia sat still beside him, soaking up what little warmth she had been given not just from the blanket, but from the proximity to something she'd never fully understood, certainty. Not the kind that came with contracts, meetings, rhythms of profit and strategy. There was a quiet confidence about this man beside her, not arrogant, not calculated, steady, present. Her coat, chic and useless, still clung to her shoulders. Her breath was warming slightly under the blanket's thin cotton, and she noticed Emma's hand, even in her dreaming, clutched at her father like an anchor. The thought hit straight at an ache she had long ignored. She whispered, "She's beautiful." Daniel didn't respond at once, just glanced at his daughter with an expression most would miss, but Olivia didn't. It was made of joy and grief pressed together so closely they were inseparable. "You're raising her alone?" she asked. He nodded, eyes still on Emma. 7 years, he answered, as if those 2 words told the full story. And somehow they did. Olivia fell quiet. No business school, no leadership seminar could prepare her for the weight she felt pressing gently at her chest. She suddenly felt overdressed for this kind of moment, not in her clothing, but in her walls. Earlier that day she had flown coach, trying to be low profile for once. A storm diverted her route. This backup train was her only way home. She had meant only to get to the city. Instead, she had arrived next to something different, something human. And something inside her began to thaw. The train clattered rhythmic and steady beneath them, a lullaby in steel and motion. The wind outside never stopped pressing against the windows, but inside that sliver of space under the thin blanket, something gentle began to grow unnamed. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Olivia leaned back into her seat, still wrapped in the borrowed warmth, careful not to pull too tight or disturb the child nestled between them. Every so often she glanced sideways at Emma's face, peaceful, tilted slightly toward her father's chest, mouth slightly open in sleep. Her little hand still curled in Daniel's jacket like a memory made flesh. Olivia had seen children before, of course, in airports, in the stores, in high-end campaigns where stylists arranged perfect little models in tiny replicas of adult fashion. She'd made decisions about children's lines, chosen packaging that appealed to sentimental buyers. But those moments were always filtered, through glass, through branding, through convenience. This child was not filtered. She was real, small and present and warm. "Does she ever get lonely?" Olivia asked suddenly, her voice quiet. Daniel didn't look at her. His eyes rested on the same spot on the shimmering floor ahead, unfocused. "I try not to let her." It wasn't said with pride, it was said with effort. She heard it clearly. "She's had to grow up faster than most," Daniel added after a pause. "But I still want her to keep the soft parts of childhood, as long as I can manage it." Olivia nodded, lips pressed closed. He made it sound so painfully simple. She settled deeper into the shared blanket, drawing it slightly higher around her arms. Her trembling had eased, but inside, something deeper shivered. Daniel's words felt like truths she'd lived beside but never spoken aloud, not because they didn't belong to her, but maybe because she'd ignored them too long. She remembered holidays spent in first-class lounges, birthdays answered with bouquets she hadn't even picked out, those perfect hotel suites that filled her contacts, envy, and her own silence. Tonight, none of them could keep her warm. She hadn't meant to speak again, but the quiet pressed at her until it cracked open. "I've spent so much time building a life," she said, exhaling sharp. "And now I don't know what I've built it for." Daniel's eyes moved, slowly, deliberately. He saw the question buried in hers, an old question not new to this train car. "You built it because you believed it would give you something back," he said. "Yes," she admitted. "And has it?" Silence. She had no answer that didn't feel like admitting failure. "I thought it would," she managed. "Eventually." Daniel didn't judge her. He didn't offer a lecture about what mattered or push his definition of a good life. He only nodded like he knew the road she was describing. Maybe not paved in Paris fashion weeks and board meetings, but paved in isolation all the same. He looked down at Emma again. "She gives back every day," he said simply. "Not because she has to, just because she exists." That softened something in Olivia. She wasn't sure if it was envy or yearning or both. There was no spotlight here, no scripted applause. Just a man, a girl, and something she hadn't known she needed, stillness. Emma stirred slightly. Her hand slipped from Daniel's coat. For a split second, Olivia instinctively moved to adjust the blanket. But before she could, Emma's hand brushed her forearm. Without waking, the little fingers slipped around Olivia's wrist and held there, small, tender, familiar, as if trusting her by instinct. Olivia froze. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but it wasn't nothing. That touch, that tiny unspoken acceptance, it did something, cracked something open inside of her. A door she had closed so quietly years ago she hadn't remembered doing it. Daniel noticed how her shoulders subtly shook, how her breath hitched just enough to be audible above the rhythm of the train. He didn't speak. He only reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a wrinkled tissue, and offered it without turning. She took it wordlessly. The tears came softly, more like exhale than breakdown. No sobs, just water sliding off a face that was used to silence. They weren't about Emma, and they weren't just about the cold. They were about years Olivia had given away to polished surfaces and people who applauded her strength but never understood her stillness. The partnerships that never asked how she was, only when she'd deliver. The rooms where she had smiled louder than she felt. This blanket wasn't even warm enough for two, let alone three, but it shielded her more than 20 penthouse rooms had done. It was a long time before she could speak again. "I don't know what to do with this," she said quietly. "With what?" Daniel asked. "With this feeling." She didn't like the confession, but holding it in had led her nowhere all these years. At least now it had weight and warmth. Daniel glanced over again. His voice was quiet but firm. "You don't need to do anything right now." He looked at her fully now. "Just feel it." Around them, other passengers murmured, some rustling in their sleep. A conductor passed by once but didn't slow. The father, daughter, and stranger under the single blanket seemed insulated from the rest of the world. Not invisibly, but respectfully, as if no one dared to interrupt what even they could tell was unfolding. Olivia let Emma's fingers remain wrapped lightly around her own. Her hand was so small. Her nails had flecks of blue polish on them, chipped. Her innocence filled every breath. "I don't know how to be close to people anymore," Olivia admitted. "It's been so long." Daniel's voice was level. "You just start where you are." Her breath caught like she'd swallowed a truth too large. She stared ahead again, blinking. "It's not that simple." "It is," he said. "We just don't trust it when it comes easy." The train began to slow, just a little. They still had miles to go, but the wheels squeaked gently against the ice-lined rails as if giving everyone a chance to breathe. "You love her a lot," Olivia said, watching Emma with something like awe. "She saved my life," he replied without pause. "And you saved hers. I hope I'm still saving it." Their eyes met truly for the first time. No assumptions, no titles wrapping them up. "I used to think love was something you earned," Olivia whispered, "like a promotion or recognition. But maybe it's just something you answer when it asks for you." Daniel didn't reply right away. The blanket shifted slightly as he moved his hand to rest gently on Emma's back, rubbing softly up and down in a motion he hadn't even realized he was doing. "You're good at this," Olivia said. "I mean it." Daniel glanced at her, a small smile barely touching his lips. "You get good when you've got no other option." Emma's hand twitched, and for a moment Olivia thought she might wake. But the child simply sighed again, wiggled closer into her father's chest, and went still. "I've never had this," Olivia said. "No one ever wrapped me up in a blanket to keep the cold out." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "What did they give you?" "Expectations," she replied without a second's thought. "Praise, pressure, but not this." For a while she said nothing else, and he let her have that, no rush to fill the quiet. And maybe that's what made her feel safe under that thin, patchy cloth, not the blanket, but the space that wasn't being pulled away from her. It was nearly an hour until the city, but the night already felt like it had lasted longer and given them more than time should have allowed. Eventually, Daniel broke the silence, his tone gentle but grounded. "I think you'd be a good mom." It wasn't a question. And Olivia, startled, didn't laugh or brush it off. She blinked instead, for a long time. "I don't know how," she said honestly. "You'd learn," he answered. "You already are. You're listening. That's more than most." Her eyes watered again, not from grief this time, but from a hope blooming so quietly she was afraid to name it. She whispered one question, voice catching in her chest. "Do you think some people just miss their chance?" Daniel looked toward Emma, then back at Olivia. "No," he said. "I think people only miss it when they don't answer the second time it knocks." The lights of the city were still a distant glow on the horizon. The train pressed forward, cutting through frozen dark like a needle through thick cloth. Inside their carriage, it was quieter now. The hum of conversation had faded. Most passengers dozed, bundled in mismatched coats and scarves, heads leaning against windows fogged with condensation. But beneath a single faded blanket, 3 bodies were cocooned in something separate from the rest of the world. A father, a child, a stranger no longer quite estranged. Emma's hand still rested trustingly in Olivia's. Her fingers, small and impossibly soft, clung not to wealth or status or promises breathed into business proposals, but to something far more ancient, presence. Olivia hadn't moved in minutes. She was afraid that if she did, the spell might break, that the child might pull away, or worse, that Daniel might realize she'd overstayed her welcome. But neither happened. Instead, Emma slept on, warm between the 2 bodies who wrapped their lives around her, one knowingly, one unexpectedly. Olivia looked down at the little girl's hand in hers, amazed how something so small could shift the weight inside her chest. "I never thought I'd feel necessary," she whispered. Daniel glanced at her, brow faintly furrowed in quiet interest. "I have employees, clients, even fans, I guess. They clap. They send flowers when I hit a milestone, but none of them would notice if I didn't show up for breakfast." Daniel smiled, not mockingly, gently. "You want to be noticed by the people who actually matter." "I want to matter without winning something first." "You already do." She stared at him, startled, and found no sarcasm in his expression. No flattery, just a simple truth. He adjusted the blanket again, pulling a corner down to better cover Emma's feet. The motion made Olivia feel like she had stepped inside something sacred. "I keep thinking about what you said," Olivia murmured, "about showing up, being there." Daniel didn't respond right away, just gave a soft nod, encouraging her to continue. "I don't know how to do that," she said. "In a real way, my whole life has been compartmentalized. Neat little success stories wrapped in fiberboard folders. I move on before things get hard. That's how I survive." She paused, her voice dipped even lower. "But that's not how you build a home, is it?" Daniel exhaled, drew his gaze toward the window, at nothing. "No, you can't schedule your way into feeling safe. You build it 1 minute at a time. One bedtime story, 100 little moments nobody else sees." "How do you know you're doing it right?" "You don't," he said, shrugging. "You just keep showing up anyway." They sat in silence, not the kind that asks to be filled, but the kind that feels like breathing after being underwater for too long. After several minutes, Olivia whispered, "I used to want children." Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't even look surprised. "But every time I thought about slowing down, another milestone showed up. Another investment, another place to be. And before I knew it," she looked down at Emma again, her chest rising and falling with the innocence of sleep. "The world just moved on." Daniel didn't offer condolences, didn't try to fix what was broken. Instead, he said quietly, "It's not too late, Olivia." She blinked. "There's no deadline on becoming someone's safe place." Her hands trembled slightly again, not from the cold this time, but from the weight of hearing something she'd never let herself believe. I've never had someone look at me like I mattered just because I was there, she said. No cameras, no reports, just me. You do now, Daniel said softly. She met his eyes, and this time didn't look away. But you don't even know me, she whispered. I didn't know my wife when I fell in love with her either, he replied. We just learned as we went. Olivia swallowed, cheeks flushed. I'm not asking for anything, she said quickly. I'm not. I just don't want to lose this moment. I haven't felt this in a long time. Daniel nodded. Neither have I. Emma stirred again, her lashes fluttering. A small murmur escaped her lips, something like "Daddy," and Daniel instinctively whispered back, I'm here. She settled, her head bumping softly against his shirt, and the breath between them softened again. That's what it's about, isn't it? Olivia said. Not being perfect, just being here. Daniel smiled faintly. Everything else is extra. She chuckled, brushing at her damp cheek with the sleeve of her coat. Do you ever get scared you're not enough for her? Daniel didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed on his daughter's sleeping face. All the time, he said. But then she smiles at me, or reaches out like she did earlier, and I think maybe, just maybe, being there's enough. That moment, when she touched my hand, Olivia's voice caught. She didn't know me, not really, but she trusted me. Daniel looked over. She sees who you are. Who I could be, Olivia added. He nodded, that too. The train lurched forward suddenly, a bend in the tracks throwing off its steady rhythm. Olivia bumped into Daniel slightly and caught herself with a hand on his arm. Sorry. It's okay. Her hand lingered for a second before she pulled it back. The train straightened again, resumed its whispering glide through the night. Olivia turned to him, hesitated, then said, Do you ever think fate brings people together? Daniel thought on it for a moment. I think pain does more often, he said, and cold trains. That earned a soft laugh from her, the kind barely heard, the kind that hadn't been let out in years. She glanced at her watch. Time was narrowing. Soon the lights of the city would be close, the train would slow, and this pocket of night carved out for the three of them would disappear. What happens after this? She asked. Daniel didn't offer empty words. He let the question sit. Whatever happens, he said finally, you asked to share a blanket, and I said yes. That means something. Her eyes softened. That's the bravest thing I've done in years. It's a start. She leaned her head slightly back, exhaustion catching up with the warmth. Her temple rested near Daniel's shoulder, not quite leaning, just a whisper of contact. And he didn't move away. The minutes passed slower now, and quieter. Like the very soul of the train knew, it was carrying something fragile. Emma hiccuped in her sleep, a soft, innocent sound, and both adults looked down at once. Her eyes fluttered open, blinking up toward the dim lights above. Daddy, I'm here, Daniel answered gently, rubbing her back. Emma's eyes moved toward Olivia sleepily. She blinked slowly, then said, You're warm. Olivia gasped softly. She hadn't expected the child to speak. Thank you, Emma whispered, eyes already closing again. You made the cold go. And she drifted back off. Olivia looked at Daniel, her mouth parted in wonder. Daniel smiled, not surprised. She likes you, he said. She doesn't even know me, Olivia said quietly. Sometimes kids know more than we do, he replied. There was nothing else to say. No business cards exchanged, no social networks connected. Just breath, patience, closeness. The way hearts beat when they finally trust the world won't shatter the second they open. The city was closer now, but neither moved to prepare. No coats buttoned, no hands shifted. They simply sat in the warmth. A blanket too thin, a night too cold, but a moment that somehow held just enough room for beginning. The lights of Chicago crept closer now, sliding along the edges of the horizon, glowing through mist like distant promises. Inside the slowing train car, movement stirred. Passengers began to collect their belongings, stretch aching limbs, tug scarves tighter around tired necks. But beneath the worn blanket, Daniel, Emma, and Olivia remained still. Emma was nestled once again into her father's chest, her breathing even, anchored in the space she understood as safety. On the other side, Olivia sat with her hands tucked beneath the fabric, her eyes fixed on the floor but her mind far away from it. She didn't want to move, not yet. Leaving meant something real had to end, or change, and she didn't know what either might look like. When the train finally pulled into the station, steel screeching gently against old tracks, the spell didn't break. It just softened at the edges. People stood up around them, stepping over bags and shaking off sleep. A conductor called out final reminders. Still, none of the three moved. Daniel glanced at Olivia. She met his eyes. For the first time, she looked truly unsure. He leaned slightly toward her. "Do you have someone waiting?" The question held no judgment, only care. She shook her head. "An apartment empty, that's about it." He nodded. "You can walk with us." The words were simple, nothing heavy placed inside them, but to Olivia they felt profound. "You don't have to say that." "I know," Daniel replied. A pause settled. Then she asked quietly, "Would it be okay if I carried her bag, the little one?" Daniel's expression didn't change, but something softened more deeply in it. "Yeah," he said, "she'd like that." Behind them, the train doors opened with a hiss. Wind swept inside, sharp and dry, sneaking down the aisle, nudging passengers toward exits. Daniel gently stirred Emma. She blinked awake, stretching with the wide-limbed faith of children comfortable in their world. He helped her sit up, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders for the cold. Olivia crouched and picked up the small backpack near their feet, lightweight but clearly loved, the straps decorated with cheap enamel pins and fabric markers spelling M. "You ready, Squirt?" Daniel whispered. Emma nodded sleepily, resting her hand in his as they stepped into the aisle. Olivia followed. The platform was colder than the train. Cutting winds met them instantly. Emma burrowed into her father's side, lip trembling. "Let's get home quick," Daniel said, pulling her closer. He didn't ask Olivia to follow. He didn't need to. She walked in sync beside them, Emma's tiny bag slung lightly over her shoulder, her breath fogging in the moonlit air. The streets near the rail yard were uneven, patched with salt and snowmelt. They passed old warehouses, silent factories, chain-link fences bowing under the weight of time. It wasn't glamorous, it didn't need to be. Eventually, they reached a small brick building tucked between two taller, darker structures. A rust-stained door, a narrow stairwell inside. Olivia hesitated on the bottom step as Daniel took out a key. "You don't have to come up," he said. "I know it's late." But Olivia didn't move away. "I'd like to if it's all right." He paused, then held the door open. Inside, the apartment was small, humble, marked by wear, scuffed floors, wallpaper peeling in spots. But the walls were alive in a way luxury couldn't ever buy. Drawings taped across the fridge, a bulletin board filled with school notes, a list of chores in smudged marker above a cartoon calendar, a tiny sweater draped over the back of an old recliner. "I'll get her to bed," Daniel said, lifting Emma in one practiced motion. She clung to his neck, already drifting again. He disappeared down the hall. Olivia stood in the living room, unsure where her hands belonged. The heating hissed from a radiator in the corner. The window cranked shut with difficulty but kept out the cold. Everything smelled faintly of lavender and old cotton. She ran her fingers along the edge of the couch, sat down slowly. Her eyes landed on a crayon drawing taped against the wall, 3 stick figures, one labeled me, the second Dad, the third a question mark. A noise caught in her throat but didn't escape. When Daniel returned, Emma was in pajamas and already asleep again. "I can make coffee," he offered. "It's terrible but warm." She smiled softly. "Please." He disappeared again and Olivia stood. She walked toward a bookshelf half full of mismatched items, bedtime books, toy trucks, a few framed photographs. She paused at one photo. Daniel with a young woman smiling, vibrant, arms around each other, a beach in the background. She was beautiful, Olivia said aloud when he returned carrying 2 chipped mugs. He followed her gaze. She was everything. Olivia turned to take a mug. Their fingers brushed. "Do you miss her every day?" she asked. Daniel's face remained still, quiet storm behind the eyes. "Every single one," he nodded. "But the ache has changed shape. It makes space now for everything else." They sat again on the couch. Neither hurried. The coffee was bad. She didn't care. "I've been scared to feel connected," Olivia confessed. "Scared it would pull everything out from beneath me." Daniel nodded. "Because you built your life on being self-sufficient. And successful. That's the lonelier kind of strong." She looked at him, mouth slightly open, caught between responding and admitting. "I hated needing you tonight," she said, "but I also didn't hate it." Daniel looked at her, slow and sure. "You didn't need me, Olivia," he said quietly. "You needed warmth, and someone gave it." She blinked, looked away, then down at her lap. "A same thing." Daniel waited, then said, "You thinking about what happens now?" "Yes, and I don't know." She looked up again, her voice slow like a confession. "But I don't want to forget this, or pretend it didn't matter." He regarded her for a moment, then pulled something from the drawer of a side table. A small notepad, a pen. He scribbled on a page and tore it out, folding it once. When he handed it to her, it wasn't with expectations, just steadiness. "This is my number," he said. "I don't know if you'll use it, you don't have to, but if you ever want to come back." She reached out, took it gently, as if accepting something ceremonial. "I do," she said. "Want that?" Daniel didn't smile, not because he wasn't moved, but because some truths are too sacred for wide gestures. "Then we'll see what's next." Outside, snow began to fall gently, thin and dry, soft as silence. Olivia stood and carefully placed her now empty mug on the counter. Then she turned to him. "I lied," she said, voice hushed. His brow lifted. "I did come here alone, but I don't want to leave that way." The snow didn't stop that night. Soft flurries turned to slow drifts, coating the streets of Chicago in delicate hush. Streetlights glowed like lanterns suspended in time, casting long shadows that moved with the wind. Inside the apartment, Daniel turned out the lights one by one. Emma was already tucked under her blanket, her tiny feet barely reaching the edge of the mattress. Breath steady, lips parted in the half-smile children wear when they feel truly safe. Olivia stood in the hallway, watching Daniel as he moved through his late-night ritual. She had never seen someone make so much with so little, never felt swallowed up by the weight of quiet like this, in the best way. "I should go," she said softly, though her voice didn't carry conviction. Daniel stopped, looked at her. "You can," he replied, "or you can stay until the snow stops." She smiled, tilted her head. "Do you always make these kinds of choices sound that simple?" "They are," he said, "when they matter." She followed him to the door. Snow blew lightly against the glass just beyond. He stepped aside, gave her the space to make the choice. She stared for a long minute, then turned back. Daniel locked the door. Months passed. The days blurred into a rhythm, a slow build of something steady. Calls at first, then visits, Then hours spent on Emma's bedroom floor helping her sort through dolls and sketch pads. Olivia never asked Daniel what they were becoming. Neither of them needed to name the thing that was growing. One Saturday morning, Emma tugged at Olivia's sleeve. "Are you gonna live with us forever?" Olivia froze. Daniel looked up from his newspaper. Olivia knelt, level with Emma's bright, curious eyes. "Do you want me to?" she asked. Emma nodded without hesitation. "Well," Olivia whispered, "maybe that's something we can figure out together." Emma leaned forward, planted a kiss on her cheek, then darted off to her crayons. Daniel reached out and took Olivia's hand, said nothing, held everything. 1 year later, the headline made barely a ripple in the business world, but it stretched like wildfire through working-class neighborhoods and online fairy tale forums. Fashion mogul Olivia Bennet marries railway worker in simple ceremony. No cathedrals, no couture, just folding chairs, hand-picked daisies, paper lanterns, and music strung through speaker wires. Emma wore a flower crown made by her classmates and ran down the aisle tossing petals like confetti. In front of friends, neighbors, and a dozen reporters who couldn't believe their luck, Daniel took her hand. And Olivia whispered, the same way she had once on a train, "Can I still stay under your blanket?" Daniel pulled her close, "Always." Sometime later, Emma stood before their guests, cheeks rosy, breath short with excitement, a secret bursting from her ribs. "I'm getting a baby brother." The crowd gasped, then howled with laughter, delight blooming from every corner. Daniel lifted her high into the air, and Olivia's hands settled on the soft curve of her belly, glowing home to new life. And from that moment, what began with a whisper on a train became a life louder, fuller, warmer than either ever imagined. Not luck, not fate, just love answered